So this is PowerPoints for Chapter 1, Part 1. This is an orientation to the human body. This is actually the basis of both anatomy and physiology. Some fundamental concepts will be covered in the next little bit. So what is anatomy? Anatomy means, literally, it means, ana means a part, tomy is to cut, so it's to cut apart. It's the study of the structure. It's looking at the physical characteristics of all the parts of the body. And we can do that by systems, which is the way that this course is. So we will look at the anatomy of skin, we'll look at the anatomy of bones, the anatomy of muscles, the anatomy of the urinary system, of the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, things like that, where we look at it systemically. That's the way that it makes a lot of sense. When I was in school, I took anatomy as a regional anatomy course, because we actually, as part of the course, dissected cadavers every week. So what we did was we looked at all the structures around the shoulder, for instance. We look at the nerves, the blood vessels, the skin, the muscles, the joints, the bones, and everything in that region of the body. It still comes up to the same thing, but it's two different approaches. And having a regional course is a lot. You really need to be doing a dissection at the same time. Microscopic anatomy is cytology or histology. Cyto means cells, so cytology is the study of cells. Histo means tissue. Hist and tis are the same word in Greek. So histology is the study of tissues. We can also look at it from a developmental point of view, as like as an embryology course. Where do these structures come from? How do they originate? And a lot of times, looking at it from that developmental point of view is a way of understanding what can go wrong in development, and there are a lot of pathologies that are based on that. So we'll touch on some of the developmental aspects, but not a lot in this course. So terminology is huge. As you've already seen, I've break from the word anatomy to cut apart. We will talk a lot about terminology. My in-class lecture, my first in-class lecture, will be all on terminology, and it's important, and I will keep on bringing it up. Every concept that I introduce, every new term that I introduce, I will dissect out the word, and the word is designed to tell you what it's about. When Leonardo da Vinci and friends started naming stuff, like the fathers of anatomy started naming stuff, they did it so that it made sense and was easy, not to make it difficult and hard. The problem is that we don't speak Greek and Latin anymore, so it makes it difficult. So you end up looking at things, you touch things, you move things around, so that's palpitation. You listen to things, auscultation, that kind of stuff. Now, physiology is the study of the function of the body, rather than the structure of the body. Now, structure and function are interrelated, but we will talk about that. Now, what's interesting is that physiology is best done on a systemic level, and look at the various systems. And that's why this course being AMP, Anatomy and Physiology together, we look at the anatomy on that systemic level as well. It's the main reason. So we're looking at organ levels, basically, or organ systems. Now, one of the problems with physiology that students have is that it becomes very difficult because it's not a collection of facts. It's all about relationships. It's all about concepts and how they relate to to everything. There's a gestalt to it. There's an understanding that when one thing changes, other things have to change to compensate, and they may not seem related at first. And so physiology is really the study of that interrelationship of stuff. It's more than just the basic principles, chemical properties and chemical reactions. As human beings, we're much more complicated than a set of chemicals that have reactions. Although at its fundamental beginning, that's what it is. And these two things work together. It's called the principle of complementarity. Now, my analogy for this is if you see a panel van, a van sitting in front of your house, and it says, Smith Enterprises or something on it, and you go out and you look in that van's window, and you see that it's full of 2x4s and chop saws and hand saws and hammers and nails and stuff like that. You can pretty much guess that the guy's a carpenter, right? But if you look out and you see it's full of copper pipe and ABS pipe and soldering stuff and fittings and valves and things, you can guess he's a plumber, and etc. So the idea is that you can guess the work by the tools involved, and you can predict what the tools are going to be by knowing what the work that has to be done is. So this is the idea of complementarity. That function always is a reflection of the structure, and structure can be predicted by knowing the necessary functions. So there's an interrelationship in this. Now, this is a hugely important concept, because what it does is it allows you to not memorize a bunch of cue cards for anatomy. When you start thinking about why, if you ask why at every step, why is it shaped like this? Why does it look like this? Why does it exist here and in this form? And you can adequately answer that from physiology, then it can't be any other way. So it's very easy then to know it. And conversely, when you know what something is and what its structure is, it's very easy to figure out what it does. And so not only is this an academic idea, the principle of complementarity, it's a very practical way of looking at things. It's a practical way of studying. It's a practical way of understanding, of remembering, and of making this craft useful. Ultimately, none of your patients that will be under your care will give a shit how well you know your anatomy or physiology. They're not going to test you on it. However, your knowledge of anatomy and physiology is an underpinning of your knowledge of pathology, and the understanding of pathology is the underpinning of all clinical practice. So without these building blocks, without this foundation, the whole thing, the whole house is built on sand and will not stand up very well. So as a nurse, it's going to be critical that you understand this stuff. Okay, this is kind of a bit of an overview of what the course is. So there's level of organization. Remember when you were a kid, you probably wrote out your name, your address. So like I would write Infinity, 40 Stanley Street, Barrie, Ontario, Canada, North America, Western Hemisphere, the world, the solar system, and etc. You could get right up to the universe. All of those are different levels of organization. And with the same thing happens here. So chemistry is really looking at reality, at atoms and molecules. And then cytology is cells, which is cells in the organelles, which are made up of chemicals, molecules. And then histology is the study of tissues, which is made up of a bunch of cells, which is made up of a bunch of chemicals. And organs are two or more types of tissues working together, which is a bunch of cells, and the organelles, which is a bunch of chemicals. Organ systems are more than one organ that work together towards something, and an organism is all of the organ systems working together to make an individual. And then we can take this one step further and say, okay, and a species is a bunch of similar organisms that are a collective, and a genus is a group of species that are related to one another, and so on and so on. It's a kingdom, and all the way up. So all the levels of biology are reflected here. So it really is this. I'm just going to go quickly through it. It's the chemical level, leads to the cellular level, which then leads to the tissue level, which then leads to the organ level, organ system level, and then organism level. Right? Now, there are 11 organ systems, which is why there's 12 slides coming up, because men and women have the one system different. So the organ systems that we will be talking about over the next 2 semesters are the integumentary system, skin, and body covering. It's not a passive system. There's physiological things happen. Vitamin D is synthesized there. There's a lot of excretion. There's a lot of secretions happen there. It's a vital, and it's vital to the homeostasis in life. There's the skeletal system, which is the bones and joints and cartilages and things, and there's a bunch of functions other than just support for that. Muscular system allows movement and breathing. All kinds of things happen because of the action of muscles. The nervous system is one of the control systems that coordinates the efforts of all the other systems. The other major control system is endocrine system. So one is an electrical messenger, the other is a chemical messenger. This is what this course is about. So between now and Christmas, we will get to this point, anatomy and physiology. Then next semester, we will look at cardiovascular, which is the heart and blood, and it's about transportation of things through the body, nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, waste products. The lymphatic system, which is all about maintaining balances and homeostasis plus immunity. Respiratory system, which is about supplying gases and removing waste gases. Digestive system, which is about supplying nutrients and nourishing. And then urinary system, which is about getting rid of stuff from inside of your body, waste products. Reproductive system for men and women is all about creating the next generation. These systems are all dealt with next semester. Now, an organism is a collection of these systems, but these systems are not all independent. They have to work cooperatively. For instance, the respiratory system works very cooperatively with the cardiovascular system. The right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. If there's lung issues, then the right side of the heart will fail because of the lung issues. It's called cor pulmonale. etc. The the cardiovascular system works with lymphatics, etc. So all of these things have to work cooperatively. And it's really about bringing things in and putting things out. This is a question that's fundamental to physiology. It's defining life. Now, there is a lot of debate. This list is different for each author. But what is it that makes something alive and something not alive? And you think, okay, well, it's obvious. Well, is it obvious in the case of viruses or prions or some of these low forms of life? How about extraterrestrial life? When we start looking at stuff going on in Mars, how do we define when something's alive or something's not alive? It's a very ethereal question. It's almost metaphysical as well. I tell a story about a bird that flew into our patio window and broke its neck. My daughter was very young at the time. She was 4 or 5. And we heard the thump, so she and I went outside, and there was this bird laying there and rolling around, still alive. And I picked it up and I was holding it in my hands and calming it. And then it died. And what amazed me is the second that it died, my daughter started crying. She knew that it died. But what happened? It didn't change temperature. It looked the same. It had a broken neck, but it had a broken neck and was alive, and then it was dead. What went away? And how did she know it without touching it? How did I know it? Because the temperature didn't change. There were points where it wasn't breathing. It was kind of holding its breath. So it wasn't that. It's a very interesting question. So this author, and this list is pretty much a universal list. So Mary will just stick with the list. Now there's this list also will bring me to another point of illustration, a study method. It's about making up mnemonics for the list. Now, a mnemonic that one of my students came up with about 15 years ago out of this textbook for this list was, my mother reads dirty magazines. Ooh, really gross. So it's my, maintaining boundaries, mother, movement, reads, responsiveness, dirty, digestion, magazines, metabolism, ooh, excretion, really, reproduction, gross, growth. So my mother reads dirty magazines, ooh, really gross. So living things all maintain their boundaries. What is the part of the individual and what is not part of the individual is defined. Dead things don't maintain their boundaries. They rot. They turn into soil. And so this is the skin. This is the plasma membranes, the mucosa, as it were. Living things all move. If you want to know something's living and you poke it and it snarls at you and moves, then it's pretty much alive, right? So there is movement of body parts, but there's also movement within the organism. So like sap runs in trees, blood runs in people, hearts beat, and so that's considered movement. Responsiveness is to be able to respond to a stimuli. Dead things don't respond. Now that doesn't mean that all stimuli will cause a response. Somebody that has no sense of feeling, as somebody that is a paraplegic and has no sense of feeling in their feet, won't respond to their feet getting tickled. That doesn't mean that they're not alive. It means, what this is saying, that there is some stimuli that will cause a response. Digestion. All living things have some way of breaking down complex molecules into usable things for them, and are able to absorb them into their bodies. So take them from the outside and bring them to the inside in a form that is now usable. And roughly speaking, that's digestion. And then once that stuff's in, they have chemical reactions that will cause change in those things. Catabolic reactions, which is to tear things apart. Anabolic reactions, which is to build things up. And then the products of metabolism create wastes, and so excretion is getting rid of those wastes. All living things have a capacity for reproduction. Now that doesn't mean that if you can't have children, you're never really alive. What that means is that at some level there's reproduction. So we all started out as one cell. At about the time that your parents were finishing the bottle of wine and having a cigarette, then you were one cell. That became 2, which then became 4, which then became 8, 16, and so on until you became a fully human body. Now, that cellular reproduction is considered reproduction, not just the production of offspring. And growth happens in living things. So this is kind of this list of things that are necessary. So once something is alive, what does it need to stay alive? It needs some sort of nutrients, so chemicals that provide the raw materials for building, for growth, for reproduction, for those sorts of things, and chemicals that can catabolically be broken down and be used for energy. So all living things need nutrients, and there's a whole subject on nutrition. For animals, for the animal kingdom, we all need oxygen. For the plant kingdom, oxygen is the waste byproduct. Carbon dioxide is what's needed. But nevertheless, on the animal side and for humans, oxygen is a necessary survival need. And we use it in a chemical reaction that makes ATP and energy that the body needs. We need water. All our chemistry is aqueous chemistry, so we are wet. All the chemistry in our body is a wet chemistry. We need to have normal temperatures to make these chemical reactions go, and we need appropriate pressures to make it work. So fundamentally, that's what we need to survive. And when we're not getting enough of any of these things, it is not amenable to survival. And a lot of illness, it can be around screwing up on the ability to use or to obtain these things. Now, the body takes these things, it has metabolism, it has all of the things that make us alive, and somehow maintains a pretty stable internal environment. And the concept of this is called homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is It means homeo, the same, stasis, to stay, non-changing. So non-changing, the same, is what it means. But that's not adequate. It really is a dynamic equilibrium. When you're driving a car down the highway, you try and stay in your lane. If you stay between the shoulder of the road and the white line. But you're never right between those two things. Sometimes you're closer to the shoulder, sometimes you're closer to the white line. And you move back and forth. If you creep off the shoulder and your tires creep off the road and end up on the shoulder, the ride gets pretty rough until you can pull it back onto the pavement. If you cross over the line and now you're heading into oncoming traffic, it can be pretty brutal, pretty scary. So you're wandering outside of that equilibrium. Really, we can look at all disease as either being on the shoulder or crossing the center line. That somehow homeostasis has gotten out of its parameters. And that if you're sick when your wheels are on the shoulder and you've got a pretty bumpy ride, you're dead when you end up in the ditch. Sort of thing. So I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to pick up the next video at homeostasis and feedback control of homeostasis.